The following conversation is between Dr. Jerry Sweetford and Amos Tarfa here, myself. Amos the Math Guy is the other name you might see on my channel. But we talk about how to raise the next generation of scientists and engineers. We focus on engineering. Dr. Sweetford is a robotics engineer. In the interview, we also talk about evolution, which is a big topic to the work that he's done. He's actually releasing a book here, I Walk, Therefore I Am, and I look forward to sharing that with people as it comes out. Now, I am excited to talk about STEM excellence on a regular basis. But one of the difference between my approach to STEM and one you might be more familiar with in the public space is that I actually engage with STEM the same way people like Isaac Newton and James Clerk Maxwell engage with it. And how did they do that? They didn't separate science, faith, philosophy, and theology. They did it all together. They did their science and they did it well. But they also had philosophical discussions, and we can see that in Newton's book, The Principia, which came out on July 6th, 1687. So today's scientists, though, I think we've gotten to a point where we've detached that discussion. Charles Darwin did his work his famous book came out in 1859. And since then, there's just been this, of course, other paradigm of science that comes into discussion. I personally am a Christian apologist as well as a medical physicist and a math and science curriculum writer. I work in the STEM space, teaching and writing math programs. I'm an adjunct professor or adjunct instructor at LaTourneau University in Longview, Texas. I have concerns with evolution, and we talk about some of those concerns. Dr. Sweetford has concerns, but we understand that this is a topic that can, people might have emails and this and that, like they might want to have interactions or not have interactions and so on. And we get that, but we firmly believe that God created the heavens and the earth, and that's the perspective that we come with at this interview. So if you want to see the full interview, it's right here. Otherwise, we have short clips that you can watch also. We both believe that, like Daniel, we need to do work and do it well, and then we need to use our platform to also lift high the name of Jesus, where faith plays a huge part in our lives, where we can point people to the why of our lives. The why of our lives is Jesus Christ. So I hope you enjoyed this interview, and I just wanted to give you a quick introduction, let you know that we are excited to advance, STEM in America and beyond, but fundamentally our why goes back to the Bible. So let me know if you have any questions. You can email amosthestemguy@gmail.com, amosthestemguy@gmail.com. That's where I'm going to have our podcast episode questions answered. So let me know if you have any questions, and we hope we can inspire the next generation of engineers in your household and in your neighborhood. Take care and have a blessed day. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to STEM Excellence with Amos, the Math Guy. Today, I'm going to be talking with Jerry Sweetford, but before I introduce him, I'm going to share briefly about what this podcast is for. This podcast is for middle school and high school parents, as well as the students, to be inspired to consider careers in STEM, especially engineering and mathematics. I have a background in medical physics, chemistry, and math. And I just love showing people how beautiful math is, and also showing how God created the world. Therefore, we see the effects in math and science. And so I'm excited to talk to Jerry Sweetford, who's like a brother to me already. Jerry Sweetford is a robotics engineer, and he has a background in mechanical engineering. And today we'll be talking through some of his story and then asking him for some advice for future mathematicians, engineers, and technologists. So welcome, Dr. Sweetford.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So if you don't mind, why don't you please introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background, kind of where you're from and how you ended up where you are today.
Okay. So am I going all the way back to
yes,
high school?
Let's go back to where were you born? Where are you from?
Oh, okay. This is good because this is education stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. I currently live in Huntsville, Alabama. So you might be thinking, how do I get from Nashville to Huntsville?
Yeah,
I'm sure you'll ask me questions if something's not clear
yes.
on this. So born and raised in Nashville back in the mid 80s. And in Nashville, there was a desegregation effort back during that time, which meant that a lot of times schools in lower income areas, a lot of Black areas, they didn't have as many resources and things like that. So this desegregation effort in Nashville meant that when I was in first grade, I got bused out to a suburban school. So instead of me going to the school that was around the corner from me, we had a 30-minute bus ride to go out to this school in a predominantly white area and neighborhood in the suburbs of Nashville. So we would have this long bus ride every day and back to go to this school. But at that school, it was a good school, and there were some things in that school that I think to this day I have certain advantages that I was learning in first through fourth grade there. And
Wow.
one of the things is that back in the early 90s, they had this class called ACOT, and it was Apple Classrooms of Tomorrow, I think. And so they had these, again, if you think about 1992, 1993, around that time, they had these computers in there. They were teaching us how to type in third grade. And so,
Wow.
of course, I use that to this day. I don't have to look at the keyboard and all that hunt and peck and all of that stuff, because they were teaching us how to type in third grade at this school, and which was
Wow.
not what they were teaching at the school in my neighborhood, I'm sure. So there were all of these, and so I started doing well, did well in the school. After that, I went to a magnet school closer to home in Nashville. In I don't know if you know what a magnet school is, but basically it's you take a test, and if you have a certain if you do well enough in the test, then you get this opportunity to go to this better school, and it's still a public school, but
Yeah.
it gives you a lot more opportunities. So I was taking algebra in, I guess it was seventh grade. Then I was taking geometry in eighth grade, so that by the time I get to high school, I'm taking algebra 2, pre-calculus, calculus, and statistics. And that
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have been my path otherwise. But
Wow.
and so math wise, just to speak of math, so I was taking calculus junior year of high school and statistics senior year of high school. And when I finished high school in 2003, I decided to get a math degree, because the school I was going to, they didn't have an engineering degree. They had something called pre-engineering.
Yep.
And basically what I did was I got a math degree at that school, and then transferred to another school, Tennessee State University, which is in Nashville.
Yeah.
And I finished my engineering degree there. After that, I got a master's degree there in engineering. And then I moved to Huntsville, Alabama to get a PhD. And so I'm still here in Huntsville. I'm doing some work with a robotics startup here. We're working on a humanoid robot. And I think that pretty much sums up
Wow.
Huntsville to Nashville. But there's plenty of other details we could talk about. But from an education perspective, that's what it is.
Wow.
That starting out at that elementary school in the suburbs was kind of something that I think that started pointing me in a different direction than maybe I would have otherwise.
Wow. So then that leads to one of my questions then, in terms of what were you thinking you were going to be when you were in elementary school? I'm just curious, what was your thought process? Was that a discussion people were having?
Oh, no, I don't think so. So if you ask, was I going to be was I thinking about engineering in elementary school? No,
Okay.
I don't even think I was really thinking about, I think I was thinking about things like a lot of people. Like I was shooting baskets on a crate that had the bottom cut out. So I'm thinking, like, I like to play basketball. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking about what I'm going to do as a career.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was not thinking like that at that point.
No problem. In Nigeria, it tends to be the case where people are thinking as young as elementary. That's why I was curious if you were thinking that too. So middle school, high school, at what point did you say, I know you said math first as a degree, but did you have a point where you feel you had direction for your life? At what point did you say, this is my direction?
Wow, because the direction's been changing even in the last few years. But I would say, so it was interesting. So my dad figures heavily into some of this stuff, because I also know that there were kids in my neighborhood that didn't have their dad there. And so education was big for him. He was going to night school to get his associate's degree when I was a kid. And he likes to tell this story that one day I was kind of around his desk at the house, and I was like in his papers and looking at it. And so he comes in, he says, "Hey, get away from there. You don't know what you're doing there." And I innocently looked up at him at however old I was, and I said, "Dad, do you know?" And he had been struggling with his math at the time, and he was like, "Well, actually, son, I really don't." So he just chuckled to himself. And he always likes to say now that whatever that math was he was doing, I easily now would be able to like do it, show him how to do it. But you know, if I went back in time, I'd easily be able to show him that math that he was doing. But
Yeah.
he was really big on education. He was really big on saying, "Hey, you're going to do well in school, and these colleges are going to want you." And so I had, even though he did not go through the process of applying to colleges and stuff, he dropped out of high school originally. So, but he kind of instilled in me and my brother and my sister this idea that you're going to do well in school, these colleges are going to want you. And he didn't really know that for sure. I mean, he did, but he didn't know that from any kind of experience. He just said, "Hey, you all are doing well." And so I had a bit of a false sense of, it was a false sense of confidence. I don't know how to explain it exactly, because I never studied, for example, for the ACT or SAT. Like, I just went and took them. They're aptitude tests, so just take it. So I go, I take the ACT, I get a 32. I took the SAT at the time, I got a 1500. And so I started getting all this mail from colleges. So it's happening just like Dad said it would happen. Like, these
Wow.
colleges are wanting me. I only now look back and understand that if I had actually studied for them, I might have gotten like a much better score, because I literally just walked into the test and just took it based
Yeah.
on my background in school. So I realize now that it's like, wow, if I had actually studied, man, I could have potentially gotten even better offers or whatever it was that I got. But
Yeah.
there was this sense of confidence where it's just like, yeah, I do well in school. I'm a good student.
Yeah.
Colleges are going to want to give me scholarships and stuff.
Yeah.
So that
So
was yeah. I don't know if
that's
that answered the question or not, actually, but
no, I mean,
yeah.
it helps me. I think part of what STEM Excellence is trying to do is to bring those conversations earlier for middle school, high school students to begin to think about their direction in life. Because if you knew in sixth grade you wanted to be an engineer, some of your extracurricular activities might be a little different in
Yeah.
terms of keeping up with the literature. And we're going to talk about that next, if you don't mind, this issue
Yeah.
of uh, thinking of a STEM tech school, or however you want to define it, because that's part of my passion. I want to raise MIT sort of standards for middle school, high schoolers, if that makes sense, like a space for innovators, creators who are learning math and science that can then feed into some of your passion in technology. But what I was going to say before that is, I think that there's nothing wrong with not knowing what you want to do. However, I think as a culture, we've normalized it too much to an extreme. And I feel like that's playing on some of our middle schoolers who are confused about life. And we should try for programs that teach them about different professions early. So that's why, two quick things. I want to give a plug for my ACT SAT course. Please don't do what Dr. Swarford did. Make sure you study for the ACT. And I have
Right.
a course for ACT as well as SAT, and sessions for people to ask questions, and then one-on-one tutoring. But we're going to come back to this later on. But basically, part of our podcast today is we're just talking about becoming an engineer. So this is a great resource, which I talked about on your podcast. I think Jake Ryland wrote it. And so what is your advice now? Before you give us the advice, I guess, what is your 5-10 year sort of dream and goals and aspirations that you don't mind, if you don't mind, just sharing with us? And then how does that tie to some of our STEM middle school, high school ideas we discussed, if you don't mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in general, I don't set huge goal. It's not that there aren't huge goals, but I have a certain vision, I guess I would say. And
Yeah.
whether it's 5 years or 10 years, I couldn't say for sure. But I
Yeah.
do have this vision of building a robotics company. My research emphasis for the PhD was with humanoid robots. I was building controllers with artificial intelligence for humanoid robots on two legs to be more balanced and stable. And so, while in that, I got this idea, and I'm looking around at Tesla is rising, and Boston Dynamics, and there are these different robots that I'm studying and trying to figure out how to make them more balanced. And I'm saying, hey, I think I could probably build something like this. And so 10 years, I guess, I would say within the next 10 years, I would want to be building this robotics company that I have in my head. And it's interesting. I've thought about, like, what does that company look like? And I think of it kind of like this mixture of Tesla and maybe like Chick-fil-A and um, and I don't remember what the other company is, but this idea of, first of all, having a founder who's a believer
Yeah.
and thinking of things from a biblical perspective, but also being a high end tech company, and also producing products that people can't wait uh, to get that product and use that product, kind of like Apple, I would say maybe. And so
Yeah.
there's the humanoid robotic side of it from a Tesla perspective, but then there's this idea of people loving your products from an Apple side. But then there's also this idea of there being a faith part to it somehow, because generally in tech, people you don't really see believers openly talking about their faith in the tech realm. And
Yep.
I mean, we have the truth, so I don't understand why we're not exploiting that as an advantage. So so if you don't believe that in the truth of how things have come to exist, that God designed things, for instance, it doesn't make sense to me that if you are wrong about that fundamental reality, that you can somehow have an advantage over me, for instance.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that maybe we aren't exploiting, that Christians aren't potentially exploiting. So I'm thinking a lot about building that. So within the next 10 years, it would be that. So where this fits into education for me would be that you need to have STEM talent in order to build this kind of company that's on the level of a Tesla or an Apple or something like that.
Yep.
And so that is often the bottleneck that prevents a company from being able to produce the next iPhone or the next Optimus robot that Tesla has or something like that. And
Yeah.
so if you don't have the STEM talent to be able to design and produce these kinds of things and to produce these new technologies,
Yep.
then you're just not going to be able to survive. And all of that, if all that STEM talent is going to the competitor, then that's who is going to do better. And so one of the things I thought a lot about, because of, I mean, now that you have some sense of my background, you understand that it was a game changer for me to go to that school out in the suburbs. And
Yep.
as much as I would like to think that I have a natural aptitude for mathematics and all of that stuff, and being able to type and all of that thing, I had the potential. It was all there, but it
Yep.
wasn't actually used until I go out to that school and have those things honed. And I'm going to the magnet schools and I'm going to these places that gave me a different view of what the future would be. So I really
Yep.
didn't start thinking about engineering until I'm graduating from high school and I go, okay, I'm good in math and I'm good in science. So I guess that would be something like engineering. But like you said, if I knew this in the 6th grade, if I knew this as an option, then I could have already been moving in that direction.
Yep.
And it would have changed some of the stuff I took. For example, I took AP biology. I took some AP courses that were useless in terms of me becoming an engineer. And I could have been taking other things. I could have been engaged in other activities. I was in the society was called the National Society for Black Engineers. I think it was something like that. We called it NSBE. I
Yeah.
was in that in high school. So that gave me a little bit of a sense of maybe that's something I could do in the future. But other than that, I mean, I wasn't thinking that way. And so I
Yeah.
think that if I'm building this startup eventually, one of the things I could do is build better schools in communities like where I came from and be able to find talented students there and be able to then use them to build this company up. And I think
Yeah.
that is that fits into a lot of the stuff that you're doing, where you're trying to transform education and STEM education specifically.
Yes, sir. And the difference between some of what we're doing and I'm looking forward to hearing more about your book here in a second. But the difference between what we're doing and just any traditional sort of STEM, company that teaches math and science is that we do want to talk about the connection of science and faith. We do want to talk about the fact of the history and philosophy of science. One of the people I keep studying regularly is James Clerk Maxwell and Michael Faraday, and I'm amazed at their faith. As a matter of fact, today, July 6th, 1687 was when Isaac Newton's book, The Principia, came out. And
Okay.
he said in The Principia, though these bodies may continue by the laws of gravity, they could not have derived their very position by those very laws. Thus, this system of the sun, planets, and solar system could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. That's from Isaac Newton. I mean, that's from the Principia. I mean, think about a scientist today talking like that. I mean, it's become very rare. And yet, that's what the 17 and 1800s would have looked like from some of the top scientists. They were able to share philosophical discussions and implications of what they were learning and teaching. And today, I feel like we just want to talk about these complex ideas in physics, and then we don't want to bring in any idea of theological potential discussions. And I just don't like that sort of narrow view of thinking. And it's not going to be solved overnight. I get it. I know some people are going to hear this and say, oh, no, Amos, keep the faith away from the science. But they don't. If we go back to Kepler and Galileo and Newton and Copernicus, we see a trend. And we are nowhere close to some of the intellectual levels of some of these people. So clearly their faith didn't hinder their science. As a matter of fact, it propelled some of them to do their science well. What are your thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The prevailing idea now is that those are separate arenas completely. And so if you talk about faith, well, then you're just creating some God of the gaps or something like that. And so
Yep.
What they would say is that you are not going to be as likely to want to explore because you're just going to be lazy and just say God did it.
Yep.
But it's not that at all, because as you've just pointed out, all of these different scientists, because of their faith, said, I want to learn more about what God has made. And
Yes.
so there is having this divine mandate almost to say, I want to learn more about what God has made, is actually more powerful than the person who just says, I think this is interesting and I want to learn more about it. And so it's these kinds of things that these people are saying are anti-truths. They are the opposite of what the truth actually is. And we have to just point them out for what they are, that it's actually the opposite. We are going to be more motivated. We are going to be better scientists. We're going to be better engineers when we are doing that and thinking of it from the perspective of God. So when I think about building this tech startup, for instance, I'm not thinking of it just to be this thing that would be cool to do. But if I'm thinking of it as being something that is potentially something that God wants me to do, that's more motivation than you just wanting to make a cool robot or something. That's way more motivation. And if you're thinking of it in the way where you can help people, and you're not thinking of it simply as a way to make money, then it's a far more motivating force behind the things that we're doing. So yeah, I think that's right.
So then that leads me to your podcast. You started the Science Faith podcast. What was part of that inspiration for you to do that?
Yeah, so yeah, the Faith Science podcast is a podcast where I'm having conversations with people like yourself, where we are looking at the intersection of science and faith. And part of that is a little bit of a frustration that I have had, where I am seeing people say the kinds of anti-truth things that I've just mentioned, where people are saying, oh, well, don't bring faith into it, while they actually are bringing their own faith into it. So if you have an atheistic worldview, you are bringing your faith into it to tell me not to say anything, right? You're constantly doing that. If you're telling me to avoid saying these things, and then what you see them, for example, in the case of evolution specifically, if you believe in evolution, you believe that God did not design things. I have to be careful, because I get angry because the way people just talk about evolution all the time and don't see that that's a religious belief. It makes sense to me that you would talk about it all the time, but don't tell me it's not religion, because people talk about it. They'll just talk about something and they'll say, well, evolution did this. They personify it like it's a person. Well, evolution did this, evolution did that. And they'll say it in a way, they find these ways to bring it up in things that it's not actually a useful thing to bring up evolution at all, but you just bring it up. And what and I don't think they do it on purpose in this way to say, I want to push my religion on you, because they truly don't think it is a religious thing. But of course it is, and it's a system of belief. And so when they bring that up, it's one of those things that I kind of get triggered by. And what I'm trying to do in the podcast is point out, for instance, that being a believer, seeing that God designed things is a crucial part to understanding them properly. And if you think that they came about through random processes, for instance, then if you're wrong about that, you're going to be wrong about a lot of other things, and you're going to be able to believe in a lot of other things that don't make sense. And so And I mean, the biggest thing of all is that it is disrespectful to the creator to
Yeah.
say these things. I
Yep.
mean, I'm a roboticist. So like if I built a robot and somehow it became sentient and then it just disregarded me or didn't want to do the thing that I made it to do, I'd be like, look, I made you. What are you doing? like, and so from a robotics perspective, I just look at that and say, you kind of imagine how disrespectful that would be to make a robot that then disregarded you and disregarded anything that you were programming it to do. So,
Yeah.
not that we are robots, but we were made by God, and we should be thinking about what is His purpose for
Yeah.
us being here and live accordingly.
Yeah. So I think for STEM excellence to really make sense, that question has to be answered of how did everything, get here in terms of what is the cause for this design that we see in the world, right? Unfortunately, there's some scientists that would argue that it's all apparent design, and that's just sad. That's just sad. To look at you and me, to look at the universe and just say it looks designed, but it's not designed. I think part of where this topic, and this could be a whole big topic, someday we'll hopefully do a breakdown of all the different sort of viewpoints: naturalistic evolution, theistic evolution, young earth, old earth, just to give people an idea of the landscape. And then, so I look forward to that sort of categorization, which is an engineering type mindset. You guys know how to categorize. So we're going to kind of categorize things, and maybe even have a roundtable discussion and bring someone and say, hey, can you give me your best case? And then, if they're open to sort of have cordial conversations with us, we'll buy them lunch so they don't, so at least we'll calm things down. But no, I look forward to that dissection. And I don't think this episode would cover all of it. I mean, if you think of anything else you want to add, which I know that you talked a little bit about walking, so maybe you could give us that example at some point. But what I was going to say is that one of the reasons why I'm interested in this topic of science and faith is because when I was in college, chemistry major, and I heard about the philosophy department talking about the existence of God. So I went over to them and I said, hey, I'm a Christian, and I would love to talk more about why I believe in God. And that led to, hey, take my class. And I took his class, and it was on the history and philosophy of science, but they focused on evolution especially. What the general public doesn't know is that there's so much debate in that landscape, and they might just assume, oh yeah, if you're a scientist, you believe in evolution, or if you're educated, you believe in evolution. And what they need to realize is there's a lot of debate going on, and there are some cases that could be made, not even from Christians, from non-Christians, about the problems with evolution. Like, this is something people don't know, is that evolution is not settled. Then people say, well, that's science. Science is not settled, and that's the way the nature of science is. Well, if I teach this in a public school in America and question evolution in certain school districts, that could cause a lot of trouble. So I think the general public really needs to pause and say, give me the evidence for evolution. Give me the evidence against evolution. Let me examine all of these details. Let me understand information theory. Let me understand DNA. Like, I don't know if people have time to do that, but if they're not going to do that, then I plead that they at least don't just buy into the idea that evolution has answered the question of how you and I got here. As some people will argue, even intelligence is in question. It's in jeopardy. If we just came here by chance, why do you trust your mind? C.S. Lewis talks about that a little bit. But what are your thoughts on that? And then please tie it into your how humans walk, maybe that too.
Yeah. So I'm writing a book that's really about this topic, and so you're kind of going in the same direction as I am. And so where would I start with this?
I talk about your book too, please.
Yeah. So let's just start with evolution first of all. I think there are plenty of reasons to suspect that they never are going to want to have this round table. Let's put both ideas on the table at the same time. Because in my estimation, it is so obvious that it cannot be evolution that once you do that, now you have clearly opened the door for this thing that they have no intention of bringing into the school systems, right? So the people that believe this they want to continue to ridicule the idea. Let's say the scientific phrase would be something like intelligent design. We can't talk about intelligent design. It allows a divine foot in the door. We cannot allow this. And so I don't think there's any desire to even put it on the same level of evolution and give it an opportunity to take hold, because at one time it did. And what happened was people, when evolution became an idea, there were people that really fought for it, and then it was given equal billing, and then eventually not. But to get back to just the idea of it in general, so in the book, I basically break the book into two parts. The first, the book is called "I Walk, Therefore I Am." It's coming out in the next couple of weeks, and basically, the first part of the book, we talk about how someone would prove that God exists. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was in college, my sophomore year of college, I was playing basketball and I broke my wrist. And when I broke my wrist, that meant I got out of piano. I was, for some reason, taking piano as an elective, beginner piano. But I didn't get out of my advanced geometry class. And my advanced geometry class was all about proofs, and we would write proofs. And so my right wrist was fractured, and
Wow.
I had to write left-handed for that class. And so
Wow.
you're having to go through proofs, and these proofs would have 8, 10, 12 steps to get to the final to finish it up. So,
Yeah.
and you can't just see the way to the answer from the first step. So
Yeah.
you have to think ahead. And so in order to prove, you would go step by step. You'd start with a certain amount of information, and step by step, you would get to a final solution where you were able to prove this thing given this set of information. And
Yes.
in that class, I had to learn how to step by step break something down, so and think 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. Because if I wrote it down with my left hand, it took 3, 4 times as long to do it, and it was worse than when I would write with my right hand. And if I didn't have the luxury of just scribbling something down quickly and going, oh no, that's not it.
Yep.
Let me erase that. I had to really stop and be deliberate and go step by step. And that's how it is when you're thinking about proving the existence of God, for instance. You want to really be step by step with this, because somebody might say, well, no, that you can't say that, or you can't do that. And so I really tried to break down what is God, not even who is God yet, but what do we mean when we say the word God? Because people can mean different things. We talk
Yep.
about what faith means. We talk about this thing that often atheists will say, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that sounds really interesting, and it sounds like it's true, that if I claim this extraordinary thing, like there's a God that made everything, then I
Yep.
must have extraordinary evidence. And then when you ask them, they will often say something like, well, I can't think of any evidence that would actually it's such an extraordinary claim. I can't even think of the extraordinary evidence that you would need to be able to prove it. But the thing is, that is actually not true. Now,
Mm.
if you go back and uh, it was Carl Sagan that originally said it or wrote
Yeah.
it in one of his books, and people still repeat it to this day. It just isn't true, though. Like, if you think about any extraordinary claim, we could, for instance, talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ and how there is evidence for that. It
Yes.
doesn't have to be extraordinary evidence, though. And so, just to give a example that everybody understands, if I
Yes.
were to go back 5 years ago and I were to describe COVID to you, and
Yes.
how and everything that happened with COVID, you would go, "There's no way. That's not going to happen. That's never going to happen." If I
Yeah.
explain what COVID was to you, it is by anybody's estimation an extraordinary claim
Yeah.
that things that happened during COVID over 2020 to the next 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
happened. But it did happen.
Yeah.
Now, let's say Rip Van Winkle was asleep before COVID happened, and he wakes up in 2024, and I'm explaining to him that COVID happened. Do I have to have extraordinary evidence? No, I just need to show. I'll bring him all of these different eyewitnesses and say, hey, this is really what happened. And after a while, it becomes clear. Okay, that's really extraordinary that something like that would happen. I
Yeah.
wasn't around for it,
Yeah.
but you've given me enough that to show that that is actually what happened. That's
Yeah.
the way things work. It's not that you need some extraordinary evidence. God needs to write out his name in the stars, or he needs to do some crazy thing to prove that he is the designer of the universe. No,
Yeah.
it's not that at all. And so no, that's not how it works. So we go through that kind of thing in the first part of the book, and then just really try to break down what it would mean to step by step prove the existence of God. And so
Yeah.
just quickly, it really comes down, in my estimation, to three things. First of all, I'm in the book just using one example, and that is that humans walking on two legs proves the existence of God. That's what
Wow.
I'm saying. That the best way to explain how we walk on two legs, which is again a very ordinary thing to us, but
Yeah.
I show in the book that that very ordinary thing to us is actually not ordinary at all, and the only viable explanation for it is that there was a God who designed it. And so I do that with basically chapter 6, 7, and 8 go into this, but in the book. But the first thing is I point out is that walking is actually very hard to do. Now I
Wow.
say that as somebody who studied walking on two legs for over a decade. So I can tell you it's hard, and if you don't think it's hard, then try designing a robot to do it. And I promise you, you'll find out very quickly that it's hard. It's
Wow.
actually an inherently unstable posture to have two legs. Have you ever heard of a two-legged stool, for instance, or two-legged chair? You can't
No.
have one because what will happen? It will fall over. And
Yeah.
so standing on two legs is also very unstable. And when we have older people who get elderly, they become more feeble. What do they have to do? They have to get a cane. They have to
Yeah.
get a walker. Why? Because now if you have a cane, that gives you a third point of contact with the floor, and now you have a stable arrangement. Or if you
Correct.
use a walker, that gives you several more points of contact with the floor. You have a stable arrangement. And
Yeah.
so two legs alone is not a stable arrangement. And so again, I know, seen plenty of robots fall over, and I've been trying to design controllers to make them not fall over. So the
Yep.
first thing is that walking is really hard to do, and it's because the dynamics are difficult, as I just said. But when you look at the human body, it has specialized hardware to stay upright on two legs. So if
Yep.
you look at our feet, if you look at our legs, if you look at our ankles, we have all of these hardwares, these structures that are specially in place to do the walking on two legs. But that's not enough, because I can create a robot that has this hardware that will allow me to do it. But if I
Yep.
don't have the software that will allow me to actually use the hardware, then
Yep.
I'm still going to fall over. So the software problem is the problem I was working on for 10 years.
Wow.
But the hardware problem is also a hard problem to have the hardware actually do what it needs to do. So
Yeah.
those three things, the dynamics are hard, the hardware has to be specialized, and then the software has to be integrated with the hardware. We see all of these three things in the human body, and it doesn't make sense to have specialized hardware and integrated software without a design. So that's the first part. Walking's really hard to do. The second part is that evolution didn't come up with those things.
Yeah.
And so you've alluded to a couple of reasons why we can say with definiteness that evolution could not have done this. And so I'll just mention the three that I talk about in the book. The first is that if you look at the fossil record, there
Yep.
is no evidence that such a thing ever happened. So what you would need to see if we came slowly, if humans gradually came to exist from quadrupedal apes, and quadrupedal just means walking on all fours, the
Yep.
knuckle walking that you see with the apes. If basically there was a quadrupedal ape and it became a bipedal human, then you would need to see thousands of missing links or intermediate forms that would lead up to that human. Not only are there not thousands, I don't think that we can actually agree on even one. And yet
Wow.
the fossil record wouldn't need to just show me one intermediate form. There would
Yep.
need to be thousands of them. And not
Wow.
only are there not thousands of them, there's not even one. And if this is and if you've ever read Darwin's On the Origin of Species, he
Yep.
points this out. He says, well, the fossil record doesn't really show what I'm talking about here, but it eventually will. Well, it's been over 150 years and it
Wow.
hasn't happened. And I don't think it's going to happen, right? Like,
Yeah.
because the problem is not that I can't find one. The problem is it would need to be filled with them.
Yep.
And it's clearly not filled with them. Anybody that knows anything about the fossil record knows that it is not filled with these intermediate forms.
Yeah.
They're just not there. So that by itself would be enough to completely discard evolution. But there are two other things. The second thing is that you would need a series of selective pressures to cause these different changes that would need to happen. So
Yep.
what do I mean by a series of selective pressures? Well, in evolution, they say that natural selection occurs.
Yeah.
And so what natural selection is this idea that nature, again, it's funny because they use these terms that are design terms. Nature doesn't select anything, but they call it natural selection, or that's
Yep.
what he called it, because it's apparent design, or it looks like nature selected, but nature doesn't select anything. but I'll let you use that term for now. But in order for nature to select things, you actually have to have a selective pressure to cause a modification in a form. So
Yep.
like the the example that's always used in biology is that during the Industrial Revolution, there were these moths that were white colored,
Yep.
that and then there were these moths that were black colored. And
Yep.
basically, what happened during the Industrial Revolution, when there was all of this soot that came out of the factories and things became black in a lot of the surrounding areas because of
Yep.
the soot in the air, then the black moths were able to blend in better. So then the black moths proliferated. There were just a lot of them. And the
Yep.
white moths that stood out when they were in the sooty area, those were the ones that basically the predators that ate those moths or did whatever to those moths they would
Yep.
eat. So the populations changed
Yep.
because of that. So there was a selective pressure there for black moths to blend in and white moths not to, whereas
Yep.
before it was the opposite. So here's the thing. If you can look at a quadrupedal ape and you can look at a bipedal human and you see hundreds of differences between them, and you're
Yep.
telling me that one led to the other, then what you would need to do is you would need to show a series of pressures that would cause each one of those changes. So if the foot is different, then what is the selective pressure, like the moth thing? What is
Yep.
the selective pressure that changes the foot? Because you have
Yep.
to have a pressure to do this, according to them. There has to
Yes.
be something from the environment that pressures the organism into changing this thing.
Yep.
And so you need to show a selective pressure for all of these things. Generally, what they do is they give you kind of one idea of why it might have happened, but
Yep.
they never try to even attempt to give you a series of them. They just give you one, but you
Yep.
would need to have a series of them, and you'd need a lot of them as well to be able
Yeah.
to explain how such a thing happened. Third thing is, to me, is the thing that is the worst of all. So again, you have the fossil record doesn't show this. You don't have a series of selective pressures that you will even give us. But
Yep.
then the third thing is that when you look at the mechanism itself,
Yep.
where they say this is the mechanism of how all of these things changed, they essentially say, okay, basically what happened is that the DNA mutated, and that those mutations somehow were helpful. Universally, biologically,
Yeah.
mutations are not helpful. And so what you have to do is you have to believe, because that's what this is, a belief system.
Yep.
You have to believe that a bunch of mutations happened that were helpful, and they kept happening for
Yep.
all across biology,
Yep.
for all of these things to happen.
Yep.
But in our experience, we see that mutations are almost never helpful. They
Yep.
almost always destroy whatever. If they happen early enough in the process, they almost always destroy the organism. And
Yep.
so what you have is you have to believe. They're having to believe that mutations are good when we see all the time that mutations destroy the organism. And
Correct.
so in that case, evolution, for all three of those reasons, those three reasons alone, but you put them together and there just really is not a viable case to say that
Correct.
evolution could have been the reason, the way that this came to be. So then the other part, in chapter 8, I talk about how it must have been designed. If
Yep.
it's not evolution, it must be design, and design actually makes sense. That
Yep.
if you, as you've mentioned, if I look at code
Yep.
that I write for a computer and I say, oh, I wrote that, but then I look at DNA and I say that wasn't written, that doesn't make sense to me. If
Yeah.
I say I look at this pump that pumps water, and then I look at the heart, which is far more efficient, uses less energy, and I say, well, that pump was built, but that heart wasn't. That
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me. If I look at a humanoid robot and I say, hey, somebody designed that, but the human body, I say, well, no, random processes over time, even though the human body is way more impressive than the humanoid robot.
Yep.
That doesn't make sense to me. So that doesn't compute to look at those things that we say are designed and then look at these other things and say that are far more impressive and to say, well, they weren't designed. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a compelling case. I think that is something that you could point out to people relatively easily. And
Yep.
it's regarding something that we all do, and it's walking. And so We all can walk on, or many of us can walk on two legs. One other thing about the reason why it must have been designed is that every healthy human learns to walk on two legs from scratch. You don't know how to do it at birth.
Yep.
And so God has put in us a learning mechanism where if you are healthy, you will learn how to walk 100% of the time. Now, I was working on this kind of thing for robots. I was trying to build something where it would learn to walk, and sometimes it would work. And I'd like to think I did pretty well. That's why I finished my PhD. But it was never 100%. It was never 100% of the time I would start from scratch with an artificial neural network and 100% of the time get to a viable walking controller. It was never 100%. And even that final walking controller was never as good as we are as humans.
Yeah.
And so the learning is one of the most impressive things I think there is. That God put in us, zero ability to walk at birth.
Wow.
And 100% of the time, if you are healthy, you will learn how to walk. To me, that's because that's the part I've been learning and working on with the software. To me, that's the most important part. I know that's a lot, but maybe you have some questions about it. But that's the heart of the book. And so, if anybody's interested, it'll be out in a couple of weeks. I got to get it finished up, but. Yeah.
Okay. Do you mind sharing the link with me or something too about where people can order the book?
Sure. So it's not you can't pre-order it yet, but it's coming in the next week and a half or so. But I have a simple link, jerryleephd.com. If you go to Jerry Lee PhD, so JERRYLEEPHD.com. If you go there, you can put your email in and you can get updates about a book when it's coming out. It'll also sign you up for this newsletter that I'm going to be starting next week, where I just give it's a brief newsletter. I call it 3:30 Thursday because on Thursdays at 3:30 in the afternoon, I'm going to give you 3 quick ideas that each of those ideas you can read them in less than 30 seconds. And so it's a quick email, something that I've learned, something I'm thankful for, something that I've been thinking about, 3 quick ideas that you can read in 30 seconds a piece or less.
Yep.
And so it'll sign you up for that as well. And JerryLeePhD.com will tell you about the book. It'll also give you kind of a confirmation email. And from there, you can also go to my personal website where I may have some information about the book there as well. But that's how they can find that.
So what I'm thinking, Jerry, I think we got a lot of things to do for the kingdom, God willing. I'm excited. I'm excited to know you as a friend, and I say that partly because we could probably talk every week and have a lot of nuggets to dissect. So I look forward to my visit to Alabama one of these days. But what I was going to say, there's a few more questions for you. So what I'm going to do is, you've actually inspired me as we're recording. I'm going to have a special. It's called the STEM Excellence Weekend Edition, where we do some of what we just did, where we actually dissect some of the implications of scientific theories and so on and so forth. I'm just saying, when I invite my guests, I'm going to tell them this is an option because you've paved the way for us by going into a topic that, again, many people don't even pause to reflect on. And so what I'm going to do is this is going to be our weekend edition. There's some books we could recommend for them, your book, of course, and then Stephen Meyer's book, which I told you about last week, The Return of the God Hypothesis. That book, I mean, seriously, if there's one book that people should look at, well, actually, it's hard to say one, but there's 2 authors in this field, Stephen Meyer and John Lennox, right, that I think people can learn a lot from. And I'm looking forward to, maybe we can tag team and interview, these guys at some point. But what I think is interesting is when you look at the evidence from design, there's just so much compelling evidence. And this is what I would be willing to say on this, Jerry. This is where I've gotten to, right? Because I love dialogue on these topics. I would say this, that as a philosopher as well, so I'm a scientist, but I'm also a philosopher on the side. I think that there is hardly any evidence to be made for naturalistic evolution. Now, I have issues with other aspects of this topic of evolution, but I'm just saying naturalistic, the idea that everything can be explained from a natural standpoint, speaking about evolution, and saying there's no designer, there's no influence of anything. Again, I have concerns about theistic evolution. in that case, they're at least trying to posit that there's somebody involved, but that's another discussion. You know what I mean? For a second, but let me just talk to the situation where people say that all this can happen and it's all came together without the influence of a supernatural being, or it just happened by chance. Which there's a book called Chance and Necessity. There's people that believe that some of this all came together by chance. My case, here's what I would say, and I it just hurts me to see what America will be willing to do in its public schools when it says that let's teach this as fact, when in fact that takes so much faith to believe it, and you're not even in the science lane, you're in another lane, you're in the philosophy lane, but you're not teaching the kids philosophy to start with. So you're just throwing this thing out that is based on philosophical assumptions and faith, and then you're saying this is a fact when it goes against everything we know about reality, such that reality needs in reality, we need intelligence to give birth to intelligence. We need intelligence to design things. Here we have intelligence, and we're saying it didn't come from intelligence. Like, this makes no sense. And unfortunately, we see a lot of it happening. I was joking with you the other day saying that, hey, biologists, you guys need to please iron this out if you're going to stay in the science community, or those of you who believe this should go to the philosophy community and have more dialogue. Again, I say this in love, knowing that there are people who are watching that, might hold firmly to evolution. All I plead with you is know what category it belongs to. That's what I'm saying. Know what category it belongs to. Because when Texas was debating the topic of teaching evolution and its weaknesses about 10 years ago, there was a student who said, the student made a comment that evolution is to us as gravity is to physicists. And I was just like, wait a second. I mean, the problem with this, and again, this is the weekend edition, so hopefully people will sit down and reflect and write some notes and send us an email, and we can definitely chat more. But here's my concern with that, and then we'll wrap up with your final thoughts on this, and then I have a few more. We'll switch into a few more practical, sort of back and forth questions for young people on engineering. But in science, you have a phenomenon that occurs, and then you need an explanation for that phenomenon. We throw things up, they come down. We see planets moving in a certain way and certain attractions to the sun, and we come up with a theory to explain the thing. There is a phenomenon that is established and without question. With evolution, the phenomenon is in question. The very thing that has a theory to explain it itself hasn't even been established as a fact. The fact that we came from something else that can be traced back to some sort of single-celled simple organisms, quote unquote, which we know they're not simple. So therefore, it seems to me that the evolutionary phenomenon is in question. Therefore, the theory itself definitely is in a lot of question. And people hear this and they might say, well, Amos, you're not an evolutionary biologist, so you can't speak on these issues. This idea of credentialism is dangerous, very dangerous, because even the COVID example you gave, some of the people that had good ideas might not have had PhDs in infectious disease, but they had good ideas nonetheless. Look where we are today. My wife and I were talking about COVID actually before briefly, and we were just saying how we can't believe that happened. We just can't believe what happened. But some of that was on the back of experts. So I'm just saying people need to be willing to face the facts, look at the evidence. They might say, well, we have to put away our biases, whatever. Let's put the evidence in front of us, and then let's be willing to be honest. At least the Christians are honest about having faith. I'm not saying that we don't have faith as Christians. We have faith, but our faith is built on something solid. And then of course, Jesus Christ coming and dying for our sins and rising again. That gospel message applies to my life, and it changes a lot of the discussion because he proved, he gave us what we needed. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about this. So anyways, who would have thought you would get an engineer and a physicist to be breaking down theology and science today? But I'm excited to be doing this with you. But go ahead, brother. What are your thoughts on the phenomenon?
Because as you were saying that it came to me because I was trying to figure out how they often do this, because there's this what you were talking about is a circular reasoning, right? Where the cause and the outcome are the same thing.
Yes.
And so when I ask you, how did evolution happen? You tell me something that's based on the assumption of evolution. And when I say, how did that happen? You come back to evolution, and you just keep going around and around in a circle. And so what people often do is they bring it up in these ways where they say, well, evolutionarily, this is how this makes sense evolutionarily.
Yep.
And you think about what that is saying, And what that's essentially saying, so for example, there are people that go back and forth on whether you should be vegan or whether you should be, for me, I'm a carnivore right now. I eat only meat. So there are people that are carnivores that say, oh, well, this is the diet that our ancestors thousands of years ago would have eaten. There are vegetarians and vegans that say the exact same thing. And,
Yeah.
and that's what's so interesting about it, is that basically everybody wants to appeal to, well, this is what would make sense evolutionarily. But
Yep.
as you said, there are people that will say, well, we can't understand anything without evolution.
Great.
Of course you can understand things without evolution. All evolution does for you is it gives you this way to appeal to whatever the idea is, and everybody gets to use it. And you can have two people saying exactly the opposite thing. One person says eat only plants, one person says eat only meat, and they
Yep.
both say it makes sense evolutionarily. What that means is that you just made up whatever it was that is the reasoning, right? Because if they both can make sense evolutionarily, then neither one of them is, one of them may be true and one of them may not be. But it means, and so you see people do this, they will make up these evolutionary stories as
Yep.
to why it would make sense for it to be that way. You're literally just making it up, but saying it would make sense evolutionarily, not
Yep.
because you have any evidence of it, but because you can tell this story, and it gives credibility to it for these people. And
Yep.
what we have to do is say, well, no, you don't have any evidence of that. You just made that up, and you put the word evolution with it, and now you have some kind of theory as to why it happened. But
Yeah.
and that's what happens when. I think what happens with all of this is, and this is what I try to do with walking in the book, is essentially say, okay, let's actually dig into the details. When you start digging into the details, you find out very quickly that there's not very much to this at all. And
Yep.
so that's what we have to do. You are very optimistic that people will sit down and actually really try to wrestle with it. I'm not as optimistic. And so I don't know. I think it will have to be much more forceful. And so I'm not sure what that looks like exactly, but I think people are not going to do that as willingly, I don't think. But maybe you're right. I hope you are. I hope there are people that are willing to actually consider both sides and really say, what does the science point to? And
Yeah.
what have the great scientists of the past, as you talked about Newton and Maxwell and these different guys, like what were they using and what were they
Yep.
going off of? And I think what you're going to find is this idea that I can't understand anything without evolution. It's just not only it's not even true for them. But I think they truly believe it. But I think you often need somebody to say, well, why exactly?
Yep.
Can you not understand anything without it? And I think that would be the place where someone would be able to maybe make some headway. I don't know.
Yeah. So you make some good points. And honestly, brother, this is where the Bible says iron sharpeneth iron. And I think that you're going to help me learn how to sort of, be willing to put the hard conversations, even where I know the people might be forcefully against the idea. But I can say this, though. Again, in Nigeria, in our schools, we did not teach evolution as fact. And that was because you have, a lot of people, either Christians or Muslims in terms of the population, and neither of them held to evolution as the origin. And so as a nation, it was something we laughed at and then we moved on. It didn't stop us from STEM excellence, though. Who are some of the top mathematicians, engineers, and so on that come to America? They're Nigerians, right? So clearly, this is the other litmus test I have. If your theory does not affect my excellence in STEM performance, maybe your theory is just a theory that can be left on the wayside because it's not affecting my progress. You know what I mean? Because I think sometimes people hear this topic and they think, Amos, this might hinder your educational sort of expertise, whatever. It's like, not at all. Not at all. As a matter of fact, I mean, it's more philosophical, as we said. And so as a matter of fact, if you stick to the facts, you'll be just fine. Now, there are people in science today, in biology, that are persecuted in a real sense of the word for questioning evolution. That is another litmus test. That is another red flag. If you're going to fire someone for questioning your theory, maybe your theory doesn't have enough ground, especially when that person has a PhD and is very well educated. It's not like they believe the earth is flat or anything. I'm sorry if you believe the earth is flat. I'm just giving an example, right? So anyways, we'll go back to engineering, if you don't mind, for a second. Using your city, And for our students, don't worry, they're gonna read your book, and so they'll make sure they understand some of what you're saying, especially the high school students, because when you go to college, this topic is gonna be big. You're going to have to wrestle with this in your biology class, molecular biology, cell biology, and so on and so forth. I was pre-med chemistry, that's why I know some of this. Okay, so Huntsville, Alabama, what is it known for? And then we're just gonna quickly wrap up with a few questions. But what is it known for, in terms of science?
Sure. So it is known as the Rocket City. So
Okay.
this is the place where the Saturn V was built back in the 60s.
Okay.
And so when the first rocket that got to the moon was built here. And
Okay.
it's interesting because kids here learn all that stuff. And I got here and had to everybody knows this stuff. And so, for example, I would not be walking around here talking about flat Earth very often because people are very or if you're somebody that thinks, well, maybe the moon landing didn't happen, people here are very touchy about that. So I would not be coming up with those talking about those things. You better have some really good evidence to try to say something like that here, because people are well versed in it, because it was so much of their history. So we have, I think we're top 2 or 3 in the nation in terms of the number of PhDs and engineers. I think probably both of those, where it's we have the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center here. And so we also have the Space and Rocket Center. If you're a tourist and want to see stuff about space, we've got that. But the Marshall Space Flight Center is here. And so we also have the Redstone Arsenal, where there are a lot of different defense contractors and different agencies that need engineers and need science PhDs. So we have a lot of that here. I did not know that before moving down here, but I happen to be somebody that fits right into all that. So it is very much so an engineering science city. So if you are going somewhere, chances are you literally have people that walk around with shirts that say, "I am a rocket scientist," that kind of thing, right? You know how people say it's not rocket science, and there are people around here that would say, "Oh, this is rocket science, what I do," right? So we have a lot of that here, and so it's very common to see people around here like that. So yeah, that's Huntsville.
Well, I think STEM Excellence Center is coming there, God willing. We're gonna have to have a center.
Right. Plenty of STEM here. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think in terms of even your vision for education, part of what I think is pretty cool, though, is that there is an element where before an actual school system or schools are built to support some of your startup ideas, for example, that you can actually just have an after-school approach to the topic where kids go to their regular school, but then they know when they show up at the STEM Excellence Center at 4:30 p.m., they're gonna get the STEM stuff that you need for your future employees. Right. I think that would be maybe one approach that is cheaper and easier to sort of scale. And then out of those STEM centers, begin to have competitions and different, create an ecosystem of these people who then maybe the ones who are very passionate, excited, end up at the company. So I'm excited to do more of that. Even starting this semester, in Tyler, Texas, we want to have these STEM excellence centers. We're going to start out of a school, for example, and we're going to basically teach the kids from a different perspective. I'm just going to show a book here. Sorry, there's a lot of lights, but this book is called Understanding Mathematics from Counting to Calculus. So we start from counting and we work our way to calculus. So imagine if this is the blueprint of mathematics that we use with our kids. We expect you to do calculus. We're not playing around here. And the thing is, a lot of math today, I don't know if you knew this history, Dr. Swafford, a lot of math today was built around calculus. During the 1960s, with the sort of the space race, we built our math programs in many ways to get kids to calculus. In today's K-12 education space, there's schools that say you don't even need to do calculus. That doesn't make sense if I'm teaching you to factor polynomials and the difference of two squares and all of this stuff, because that doesn't have any application to everyday life for most of these kids. Right. So we need a platform that helps these kids see the connection to calculus. And so these STEM excellence centers, think of Isaac Newton, think of James Clerk Maxwell, think of those guys coming to us after school. That's our standard. Our standard is Newton and Maxwell, not any state standard, because most state standards are limiting to their math knowledge. Math is too beautiful to limit kids to pre-calc. What are we doing? Anyways, I was going to joke yesterday and say that I'm going to lower my bar, because I think I've been too intense with the public. So instead of getting kids into Calc 3, linear algebra, and differential equations, I'm going to lower my bar, and we're going to stop at Calc 3 in high school. Is that okay? Can we just stop at Calc 3?
Well, I mean, what you're saying, it's interesting because when I got to college and I was taking Calc 3 and I was taking linear algebra, I just remember thinking, yeah, I could have done this a couple years ago. Like I remember thinking that there was that when I look back and think about algebra and geometry and all of those, like I started taking algebra in seventh grade, but
Yep.
there was nothing that would have stopped me from starting that in fifth grade. I don't
Mhm.
I don't see anything that would have stopped me. It wasn't like it was hard or anything. And
Yep.
so if I feel like I have a certain aptitude for that type of thing, why
Yep.
not start earlier? Why not get to Calc 3? Linear algebra, I mean, it's not really I mean, I'm saying that as a math guy, but like I don't I don't think it was that hard. Like I was taking statistics. I remember statistics senior year.
Yeah.
Statistics came very easy to me. I
Okay.
and so I was in math competition. So yeah, I was that guy in math competitions and stuff, and did really well in that. But there was nothing that would have stopped me from taking statistics in
Yep.
ninth or 10th grade. There's nothing about it because it's not calculus based. So
Correct.
there are these different math courses that you could easily have done something different with, uh, and if you know you're going in that direction, why not? I don't. Yeah, and so I think that's when you see these kids that are like 13 years old and they have a PhD. I guess that's what they did. I don't
Yep.
know. They were taking all this stuff really early, and I guess that's what they did. But why not have more people like that? If you can do it, why not have that track to be
Yep.
able to do that? I don't see why not.
No, that makes sense. And actually, funny enough, I'm just going to say something about this book. The author of this book is an electrical engineer. And that's one topic I want us to make sure we touch before you run
Yeah,
is he wrote it because he wanted a condensed version of, math concepts of 12 years put into one book. And I was able to contact him, and he's actually going to be a guest of our show in the next few weeks.
yeah,
He was involved with Qualcomm, which is a company that deals with cell phones, as one of their vice presidents. But I just think it's pretty cool that, an engineer saw the problem in math education, and he wrote this tool to like help a lot of kids learn math. So we actually have about 25 copies of this book that, if people want to order, they can email Amos the math guy at gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to talk through that with them. We are also going to have a video companion that goes with the book. And the idea is that if you want to take like literally 1 year and learn everything you need to be good at math, this is it. You have all your basically first grade to the calculus in one book. I mean, that's been part of my passion, is bringing counting to calculus to the general public. So one practical, pragmatic dimension then is for you as an engineer, what are the branches of engineering that you are personally sort of comfortable with or that you deal with? Can we just look at that practical side before we land our plane?
sure, sure. So for me, I'm in robotics, so
Okay.
it's a very interdisciplinary thing. So
Okay.
you don't get to say, well, my background is mechanical, so I'm not going to do that electrical stuff, or my background is mechanical engineering, but I'm not going to do that computer science stuff. Like you don't get to do that.
Yeah.
You work on whatever you need to work on to get this robot to work. And
Yep.
so for me, I would, if I had to pick three, it would probably be those three areas. I would say it was mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and computer science. So there's coding that's done. There is, again, the mechanical structures that you may be doing things with, or
Yep.
doing CAD drawings or things like that. That's more of a mechanical direction. But then
Yep.
there's electrical stuff as well, where you're wiring things up and where you're doing diagrams potentially, needing to be able to look at a diagram and understand what's going on. And so the thing about all of that is, and I think this is true for any education, is that it's not a sense that I get a degree and now I know everything. You're constantly learning new
Yep.
things. You're constantly having to learn new languages. So in the middle of my PhD, I was working on AI stuff, and every time I turned around, there was stuff that was written in Python, and I wasn't familiar with Python. I had done some stuff with C++. I learned C# when in a previous lab, and I was writing a lot of things in MATLAB, but it became clear I've got to learn Python now. Now, what happened was I just had to go learn Python. I didn't take a course. I just started coding things up in Python, and I got to the place where I got really good at actually looking at MATLAB code and being able to convert it into a Python version. So I could take something that I built in MATLAB, which is Matrix Laboratory. It's a software that a lot of engineers and tech STEM people use.
Yeah.
I was able to take that and convert it into Python to be
Yep.
able to do things on the robot. And so it's interesting. I came across while I was finishing up my PhD, I came across a listing where there was a local company that was looking for people that could take MATLAB code and convert it to Python and vice versa. And so I interviewed with them and everything, but they basically said, "Look, you're getting your PhD. You're not going to want to do this job." So they were probably right. But when you're like a grad student and you're kind of broke at the time, you're wanting something. But
Yeah.
they were right. I would have probably finished my PhD and been gone after that because I wouldn't have wanted to do that job. So, but the point is, I learned that skill that would be useful there. So for any students, like I would just suggest that you think in terms of working on projects that are
Yep.
going to force you to gain more skills.
Yep.
And so that way you're going to get the skills and you're going to be able to do the thing, but it's moving you in the direction of creating this project. And when you do the project, you could be able to show that project to someone else and say, "Hey, I did this." And if the recruiter is asking you some question, you can say, "Hey, I had this problem and I went and learned Python and I went and
Yep.
learned this and I went and learned that." So that's what I would say with regard to that.
So that's pretty cool. I mean, if they look at your transcript and you have a D and they say, "Hey, why did you get a D?" You could say, "Hey, I was learning Python for a project on, so that's why I got a D
Yeah,
with
I'm not telling
biology."
anybody to get D's or anything. I'm just saying I still kept my good grades, but
Yeah.
well, in my case, I was all dissertation by that time, so I was just purely working on research. But
Yeah.
in general, it, look, you might have to give up some YouTube and Netflix, and
Yeah.
you might have to give up some things to be able to work on those kinds of projects. You don't have to. Working on a project doesn't mean that you won't be able to still get straight A's. Like that
Yeah.
was never an excuse for me in terms of grades. So
Wow. No, and I was teasing. I'm all for people getting good grades. But yes, time
yeah,
management is what's gonna be key. And so I think as we're talking, brother, I'm thinking to myself, man, we need to brainstorm a middle school, high school sort of pathway engineering track, or this, like imagine if a parent reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want to raise an engineer well. I want to do that." And then we basically give them some nuts and bolts and strategies. I can deal with more of the pedagogy and the math and science sort of pathway, but I think in terms of practical skills and that they should be working on, kind of hands-on coding, I think that'll be fun. It'd be fun to
yeah,
create this pathway so that middle school and high schoolers, even now in Nashville or in Huntsville, can begin to dream big. I looked at the data yesterday. It was very shocking for the top 10 majors on return on investment, or top 10 majors for like salary or something. And it had engineering all over the place after your bachelor's. Is that true?
I mean, it's true. I didn't go into engineering because of that, but it's always interesting because I'll tell people I'm an engineer, and like I was visiting my grandmother one day, and my cousin came in and she was like, "What do you do?" I was like, "I'm in engineering." And she was just like, "Yeah, I want a room in your mansion when you get it one day." Right? That's what people just immediately think, you're going to just be like this really wealthy person. And
Yeah.
I mean, I I would assume that I'm going to do well
Yep.
financially, but I mean, yeah, I mean, all of those, I think sometimes there's a friendly rivalry between the different disciplines. I think right now probably electrical is the highest, or maybe architectural or something like that. But and mechanical's not. I don't care about that part. But yeah, many of the engineering disciplines, computer science is up there. If you have a career in that, you can do quite well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I kept seeing computer engineering, electrical, and chemical. Chemical
Mhm.
kept coming up all the
Yeah.
time. I'm like, wow, that's maybe it's tied to oil or something. But like those guys
Yeah.
were consistently coming up. Yeah. So then on a practical final point, then with your PhD, you said it took you 10 years. Is that normal, or is that just
That is not normal. No.
okay?
So there's a whole, I could go into an entire thing about why it took so long and COVID and what that had to do with it and a lot of different things. But
Okay.
ultimately, what I would say is I got bogged down in my program and I didn't have other students around or anything. So it was just me, and the work didn't go well.
Yeah.
I didn't just buckle down and focus.
Yep.
And so when I finally had to, I got it finished, but I I got distracted. And
Okay.
so there's an entire podcast book, whatever,
Okay.
about distraction and just not believing you're going to get finished. And
Yeah.
how when I fixed that, I got it done. And
Uh,
I'm thankful that people don't care really about how long it takes. They just say, "Hey, you got a PhD, great." So,
yeah.
but I could have gotten finished earlier, much earlier,
Yeah.
but there was a lot that I did learn over the course of that time. And honestly, the robotics landscape kept shifting during that entire time. So what I
Yeah.
was planning on doing at the very beginning, it kept shifting, and then it was like, okay, I need to do a different problem. And
Yeah.
I didn't buckle down during that process and say, okay, let me just get this finished. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so no, it should generally take maybe 5 or 6 years if you go to MIT or somewhere like that. But there's never a set amount of time. Well, again, 10 years is probably the cutoff. And for me, I was at a point where if I didn't finish, I was getting close to the point where they were probably going to kick me out of the program. And
Yeah.
so that incentive made me say, I've got to get this done, and I had to believe that I was going to get it done. And when I
Yeah.
did, so I'm really big on faith right now because of that, because I've seen what happened when my faith shifted. And when I said, I'm going to finish this and just keep moving forward and acting in that way. And it helped me work harder. It helped me get more focused. Everything
Yeah.
happened when my faith shifted. So yeah, it shouldn't
Wow.
be 10 years. No, it shouldn't.
Yeah, okay.
And so, yeah.
So I think you and I definitely, yeah, another episode for the future generation on that issue of how to buckle down, focus, because same thing happened to me. My master's degrees took me a little longer. It's just, there was times I even questioned if I could break through. I had like advanced statistics 1 and 2. My mind was struggling with, why am I doing this particular class? Because it didn't seem to connect to my physics job. And so it was learning how to do courses that I didn't even think I needed, but I had to do them to get the master's. And I think that's part of what will help in terms of one of the questions I had asked, and we can definitely dissect it next time, because I believe there's some work to be done. And I really hope the Lord gives us opportunities to work on some projects. But I think that we need to teach people the non-STEM sort of traits that are necessary for STEM excellence, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
one of them is this perseverance and grit and tenacity. And then, of course, as Christians, we talk about, prayer and community and collaboration, actually, which is the general concept, not just a Christian concept, but it's important. Collaboration is important.
Yeah.
Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell, they met later in life, but their collaboration gave rise to some other things, right? Faraday had the experimental skills. Maxwell had the math skills. And Maxwell's equations and some of his math work is what elevated Faraday's work. So it's really interesting to see collaboration. So maybe in our engineering lab or whatever we want to call it,
Yeah.
we can have these collaboration impact, and we can have Zoom meetings where this collaboration is happening. And then we can, of course, talk about the implications of the discovery. So one last book I'll mention, and then you can give us some final thoughts.
Mhm.
Actually, we wanted to know about your hobbies, and then we'll take some final thoughts. But this book is called 2084 by John Lennox, and it's called Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity. The reason why I find it interesting, again, is that he's making us think about some stuff, right? There's some people that believe in transhumanism. They want to live forever. And
Yeah.
and it's just like, okay, let's pause and answer these questions. One of my students heard that idea and he said, I don't want to live for 400 years. Like, what's this? This is not good. So then notice that the question of destiny comes up. And this is where, as scientists, we have to realize we're humans, first of all. And we have to answer the question of, where are we going when we die? Is there a place after this earth, right? And that's where John Lennox, in his book, Can Science Explain Everything, does a great job of reminding us of the gospel. So anyways, I love the 1700 scientists because they talk about their faith. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah.
And we need to do our jobs well, like Daniel in the Bible. And then we need to also talk about what is the reason for my life? And of course, for me, it would be faith in Jesus Christ. So, but yes, what are your hobbies and non-STEM or anything else as we wrap up?
Hobbies. Okay, that's a good question because I stay pretty busy. But I like to get some basketball in where possible. But I mean, that's more of an exercise thing, I guess.
Okay.
I play a little chess online, and
Okay.
but again, with those things, they can be a distraction. And I'm in a process right now of kind of finishing this book. Um, doing some entrepreneurship stuff. So there's just not a whole lot of time for hobbies. By the time you're spending time with family, um, and basically doing stuff with them, there's not a whole lot of time to do other things. And you might say that the business stuff that I do is maybe a hobby, but I wouldn't really call it that. And
Yeah.
so, and then I mean, I get to work on, I'm building a simulator right now for the humanoid robot with this robotics startup. I mean, in many ways, these different things are things I'm actually interested in. So I don't think in terms of having a hobby apart from those things, because I would rather just spend more time working on these things.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that I don't. I think it's
I
healthy. I'm not in isolation, because that's one of the things that did happen during that long period in the PhD that I had to come out of. I got
yeah.
isolated. And
Yeah.
when you get isolated and you don't have people around you, it's not good. And
Yeah.
it is not good for man to be alone. It's not just about men and women, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it is not good for man to be alone is about man in general. And I
Yeah.
got isolated a little bit, or I got isolated a lot in that middle part where it went way longer than it needed to. And
Yeah.
so collaboration is key. So like I'm looking, to collaborate. And that was not, I'm pretty introverted. So I can survive being on my own. I can survive not talking to people for all day.
Yeah.
I can get away with it, but I don't thrive. And that's the thing I've seen now when I've started to collaborate more, when I've started to tap into community and being
Yeah.
around people more often. I've seen that I'm better that way. I'm better spending more time with family rather than just every now and then. So
Yeah.
that's something I've for sure seen.
Okay. Wow. Wow. I really think that some of these life skills or traits are going to be very helpful for the future engineers. And then also just mentorship and helping them have people they can talk to while they're going through this phase of figuring out their lives. And I think I love rockets a lot, and that's part of why I use it as part of my sort of imagery, logo, a lot of stuff. I love rockets,
Yeah.
and I would love to see how I can raise the next generation of scientists who go through my math program efficiently, so they can get towards that destination of building rockets. And so yeah, Huntsville, Alabama is going to be a huge part of our connection, and Houston is the other place I go to often. So we got Huntsville and Houston, we got those covered.
A lot
So
of
if anybody's
similarities,
watching,
between those.
oh, you said?
There's a lot of similarities between those two cities, in
Okay.
that sense of the rocket stuff,
Yeah, and then so I think we just need to get a hub between those cities. Do you think you're going to stay there indefinitely, or are you already pondering like other cities, like
and I'm
Huntsville?
pondering other cities. For now, I'm here.
Okay.
I've decided to stay here.
Okay.
I've put down some roots here. Not married
Okay.
or anything yet, but again, I'm really just assuming that I'll be moving forward. But I can't say if some opportunity came up. But for now, I'm assuming I'll be here for the next indefinite future.
Okay. Well, after this episode, I'm going to start looking at dates, and maybe we can collaborate on meeting up one of those dates. But no, thank you so much for everything you shared. And for your podcast, the Faith Science Podcast, thanks for having me on that as well. I know you have the 2 episodes, and we'll make sure we share with people the next series of episodes. As you release them, I'd love to keep sharing that out there. And yeah, just looking forward to what the Lord will do during this time in history, where we have technological advancements, but we don't necessarily have our values and our ethics growing at the same rate. And that's not a good thing when we need that to happen as well. So young people and families, Dr. Jerry Sweetford and I love just talking about life and faith and science and innovation, creativity. But ultimately, we want to bring it back to truth. And that's something that you can expect to hear from us on our different podcasts. So thanks again for talking. I look forward to chatting more. And thanks for inspiring me today.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, thank you.